Okay, and welcome back to the last part. Hopefully you have a chance to get out and do some stretching or go for a walk, and we'll move on to the last part here. So last thing I want to deal with is fertilization and development here. So how do these two things come together? So what happens during the process of fertilization? Well, sperm and eggs fuse. So you can see on this kind of color image here, the yellow is the sperm, and the kind of pinky reddish color is the egg that's there. So during sexual intercourse, semen is released just below the cervix. So here's the vaginal passageway there. This is the cervix, the bottom part of the uterus right there. So this is where the semen is released, and then the sperm in the semen will make its way through the opening of the cervix up into the uterus, and then eventually through the fallopian tubes out to meet the egg there. So in order for fertilization to happen, you have to have two things. You have to have sperm and you have to have an egg. So eggs are released during a process called ovulation. Happens once every 28 days approximately um, per menstrual cycle here. So this shows you kind of these maturing follicles that are inside the ovaries. Ovulation is the release of the egg. Happens about day 14 of the menstrual cycle, give or take a little bit. It can vary considerably from woman to woman, kind of depending on what's going on. So this is where we have all these different kind of hormonal things that happen. Estrogen, progesterone occur. Body temperature can fluctuate. You can see kind of the lining of the uterus builds up, builds up, builds up, ready for implantation to happen kind of toward the end of it. And then if it doesn't happen, then we're going to shed the lining of the uterus, and that's what the menstrual flow is. It's that loss of the uteral lining every month there. So implantation, this is when the egg becomes implanted in the wall of the uterus, which would happen anywhere kind of through here. Um, and then the egg is surrounded. So when they meet, the egg is surrounded by this protective layer that sperm can attach to. And then on the very head of the sperm, there's this little enzyme packet that actually breaks down that protective layer of the sperm. So one of the thoughts is, that people say is, the fastest sperm is the one that fertilizes the egg. Not necessarily, because the fastest sperm can get there and it can actually break down a little bit of that protective membrane there, but may kind of get lost or discarded or something like that, and then another sperm can come in and then use that opening that first sperm created in order to kind of go all the way through there. Another thing that happens is we talk about well, how do twins come to be? So there's two different major ways that twins can happen. One is what we call fraternal twins. So fraternal twins is actually the right image here, where we have two separate eggs released during ovulation, and then they're both fertilized independently. So you end up with two siblings that are growing up, and they are no more or less related than any other two siblings that are born kind of at different times throughout the year, but because they start off as two different eggs, two different sperm fertilize them. And then we have what we call identical twins. So this is where there's a single egg that's been fertilized. As it starts to develop, at some point it splits apart and produces two genetically identical embryos. So here you can see kind of the placenta and the two fertilized individuals there, but they're genetically identical. There is some variation on these that we won't go into, but those are kind of the two major ways that twins can happen or multiples can happen. Typically, multiples beyond twins are some sort of fraternal twins, but there have been cases, from what I understand, of identical triplets, I believe, or even cases where you have two fraternal twins and two identical twins and then a fraternal twin in there at the same time. So there's lots of combinations that can occur. The placenta itself is this organ that connects. So here's our placenta, connects the mother and the embryo. It's kind of a mesh of both tissues there. It becomes becomes the source of the embryo's respiration. So blood goes quite a bit between. So blood passes right next to each other between the mother and the infant there. So you get this diffusion of oxygen in, nutrients in, waste from the growing fetus get diffused out into the mother's blood so that she can get rid of it there as well. So there's a crossing of the material that's in the blood. The blood itself does not mix, but the material between the two different bloods will diffuse between the mother and the infant there. All right, so some other things to note, you don't need to write these down. So during pregnancy, months 4 to 6 approximately, fetal heart becomes large enough to be heard with a stethoscope, which is kind of about banana size, something like that. Bone continues to replace cartilage that formed earlier on. There's a soft layer of hair that grows over the skin of the fetus. And somewhere in there, the mother may begin to feel the fetus moving. That's called the quickening, when you can feel the fetus begin to kick or punch or whatever it is. By months 7 to 9, the fetus is going to really double in mass. This is a huge growing period. Lungs and other organs are going to undergo a series of changes to prepare them for life outside the uterus. The fetus is now somewhat able to regulate its own body temperature, and the central nervous system, brains, and spinal cord, and lungs complete their development. So here you can see the fetus inside the abdominal cavity there with the placenta down below there. All right, so moving on. Later development, on average, it takes 9 months for fetus to develop fully. It's 280 days, 40 weeks, really is kind of what we're dealing with. This term 9 months is used kind of in general because months aren't exactly 4 weeks all the time there. Babies born before 8 months, 37 weeks, are considered premature because they may, let me jump back here, they may not have their lungs and central nervous system fully developed. They may not be able to regulate their body temperature. They're at much greater risk. And so they're often put into something called the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. And so that's where they'll be monitored, they'll be incubated, they'll be make sure that they're kept warm and everything like that. All right, and then from here on out, there's just kind of more questions. So that continues. That got us all through the end of the last part there. And we'll see what happens next time. All right, talk to you later. Bye.